Shabbat Shalom. So this week's Torah portion is Parshat Vayetzei, and it begins with Jacob alone, afraid, and on the run. He's exhausted, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then we read something surprising. He lay down in that place and dreamed. And behold, a ladder set on the earth, its top reaching the heavens, and angels of God ascending and descending. Jacob's first direct encounter with God does not come through prayer. It does not come from study. It does not come from action. It comes from sleep. Jacob does not prepare for this holy moment. He collapses into one. And the Torah is teaching us something essential here. Spiritual transformation does not always happen when we are striving. Sometimes it happens when we finally stop striving. Jacob uses a stone for a pillow, not exactly a spa. He lies down outdoors, vulnerable, uncertain about his future, cut off from home. And that is where God meets him. Not in safety, in exhaustion. Not in confidence, in fear. What Jacob dreams is not comfort, it is connection. A ladder, heaven above, earth below, and movement between them. In his sleepless life, Jacob thought heaven was far away. In his sleep, he learns how close it is. God then speaks in the dream. I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go. I will bring you back. God does not promise an easy life. God promises presence. What sleep really does, in his book that I reference to a lot of patients as I'm a physician, by Dr. Walker, Why We Sleep is the book, explains something that changes how we think about rest. Sleep is not shutting down. It is one of the most active states that your brain ever enters. While you sleep, memory is organized and stored. Emotional pain is processed. The immune system is really strengthened. Cells repair themselves. Hormones rebalance. Creativity increases. The risk of heart disease, dementia, and depression decreases. Blood pressure goes down. Sleep is one of the most powerful biologic features our bodies have. Every night, your body climbs Jacob's ladder. Signals rise, waste clears out, connections restructure. Healing happens when you are unaware. Jacob does not wake up with new information. He wakes up with a new identity. Before sleep, fugitive. After sleep, bearer of a promise. Before sleep, alone. After sleep, companioned by God. Sleep as spiritual surrender. The Torah does not describe Jacob building an altar. He builds a bed. And there's a lesson there. Sleep is an act of faith. To fall asleep is to admit, I am not in control. I'm not required to hold everything together. I trust the world will keep turning without me. Our culture glorifies exhaustion. We praise productivity. We praise burnout. We reward sleeplessness. But the Torah says even the future of the Jewish people begins not with effort, but with rest. Jacob wakes and says, surely God was in this place, and I did not know it. Of course he did not know it. He was asleep. But the Torah suggests something bold. God does not wait for us to be conscious to encounter us. Sometimes the divine works best when the ego is quiet. As we move past Thanksgiving, our holiday of gratitude, we usually thank God for what we count: food, family, health, shelter. But Jacob invites another kind of gratitude. Gratitude for what is happening when we cannot see it, for the healing we do not supervise, for the brain rewiring itself in the dark, for strength that returns without our permission. Thanksgiving is not only about abundance, it's about enoughness. Sleep is the deepest form of thanksgiving. It says, I'm satisfied enough to stop. I trust enough to let go. Jacob's ladder is not gone. Between stress and renewal, between fear and meaning, between body and soul, every night you step onto it when you lie down. Even when you don't see angels, even when you don't remember dreams, even when it feels ordinary, the miracle is not that Jacob dreamed. The miracle is that sleep changed him, and it still changes us. And after this Thanksgiving, may we thank God not only for what fills our plates, but what restores our bodies, not only for what we collect, but what we release. Holiness was here in our sleep, and Shabbat Shalom and happy Thanksgiving.
Shabbat Shalom.
So this week's Parsha is Vayetzei, which starts Genesis 28, verse 10. Vayetzei Yaakov mi Beersheva ve'yelech Harana. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Jacob flees after tricking his brother Esau out of both his birthright and his blessing. He goes to sleep. He sees the ladder with the angels going up and down, and God tells Jacob that God will protect him and grant the land there to him and his numerous descendants. In the morning, Jacob creates an altar and renames the place from Luz to Beit El, the house of God, because he says God was in this place. Jacob then goes to the home of his kinsman Laban and marries the sisters Leah and Rachel, and a lot happens. But before he meets either of his wives, we get this. Genesis 29, verses 2 and 3. There before his eyes was a well in the open. 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, for the flocks were watered from that well. The stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well, and the sheep watered. Then the stone would be put back in its place on the mouth of the well. And a few verses later, in verse 10, we get this. And when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, the flock of his uncle Laban, Jacob went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well and watered the flock of his uncle Laban. He then kisses her, bursts into tears, reveals his identity, and Rachel goes off to get her father Laban. But going back to verses 2 and 3, we've got 2 somewhat lengthy verses regarding this well and these sheep. Why? In the Talmudic Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina has 6 different interpretations for this passage. In the first, the well is a well, but the 3 flocks symbolize Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Drawing water from the well signifies drawing water from the well, but the gathering of the flocks symbolizes the encampments of the Israelites in the wilderness, and putting the stone back into place signifies putting the stone back into place. So about half of that interpretation is fairly literal. But then in the second interpretation, the well is Zion, and the 3 flocks of sheep are the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Drawing the water from the well signifies people drawing the divine spirit from the festivals at the temple. The gathering refers to people coming from all over the land to congregate at the temple for the pilgrimage festivals. Rolling away the stone refers to drawing down the divine spirit from there, and then replacing the stone refers to things going back to normal until the next pilgrimage festival. In the third interpretation, the well is still Zion, but now the 3 flocks are the 3 courts of ancient Israel, one on the Temple Mount, one at the entrance of the courtyard, and one in the chamber of hewn stone. Drawing water means hearing a ruling of the courts. The great stone is the high court. Rolling the stone away is hearing the ruling, and returning the stone is deliberating the ruling until it was properly established. In the fourth interpretation, the well is once again Zion. The 3 flocks of sheep are the first 3 kingdoms. The great stone is the merit of the patriarchs. The flocks gathering is the Roman Empire conscripting troops from around the world. Rolling the stone away and watering the flocks both signify, quoting here directly, as they become wealthy from the consecrations in the chambers, which seems to refer to the kingdoms and or the Roman Empire. But the stone being put back signifies that, quote, in the future, the merit of the patriarchs will prevail. The fifth interpretation has the well as the Sanhedrin, the great rabbinic court. The 3 flocks of sheep are 3 rows of students who would sit learning. The flocks being watered is the students learning halakha. The great stone is the most distinguished member of the Sanhedrin who would analyze halakha, Jewish law. The gathered flocks are gathered Torah scholars. Rolling away the stone is hearing the halakha, and returning the stone is, like in a previous interpretation, deliberating and arguing until the halakhic ruling is established properly. Finally, in the last interpretation of Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, the well is the synagogue. The 3 flocks of sheep are the 3 called to the Torah, that is, the 3 weekday aliyot. The gathered flocks are the congregation, and rolling away the stone and watering the flocks is the congregation hearing the Torah. Interestingly, the great stone symbolizes the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, and returning the stone symbolizes the evil inclination returning to its usual place after the Torah service. So there's 6 different interpretations of the meaning of these verses, spanning all the way from the story of Exodus all the way up to the relatively modern idea of the synagogue and the weekday Torah reading. But all of these interpretations have the sheep and the well symbolizing things that would take place in Jacob's future. So, fast forward 1,000 years or so, and we get to the medieval commentators, Rashi, Rambam, and Radak. And they all offer practical clarifications about the exact position of the sheep vis-a-vis the well, and why the well would have been covered with the stone to keep people from stealing water, to keep people from falling in, and so on. But then Chizkuni, another medieval commentator, adds this comment, that the scene of Jacob rolling the stone away from the well has been recorded only in order to teach us about the physical strength of Yaakov, since normally it takes a whole group of shepherds to roll the stone away. Another later medieval commentator, Rabbi Jacob ben Asher, in his commentary Tur HaArok, says that this passage shows Yaakov's physical strength and attributes that to the new hope that Jacob got in his dream about the ladder. He quotes Isaiah, "The people placing their hope and trust in the Lord will experience physical rejuvenation." This is from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. He also compares the well symbolically to both the temple and the Torah, since the 3 flocks of sheep could represent the 3 pilgrimage holidays when people come to draw spiritual inspiration from the temple, the way sheep drink water from the well, and they gather around it the way people cluster around Torah scholars to get inspiration. He mentions the Torah being compared to spring water. Even the stone being replaced has a symbolic meaning, again, the period after the festival when pilgrims return home and the temple is relatively dormant. Then, Rambam, the 13th century Catalan rabbi Moses ben Nachman, aka Nachmanides, ties, Ramban, not Rambam, Nachmanides, not Maimonides, ties all this together. The fact that Jacob's been journeying and is tired, and yet he can roll away this big stone that took all the shepherds to move, means that God, who had appeared in the latter dream, gave him extraordinary strength. He also cites the rabbis in Breshit Rabbah, going all the way back to the Midrash, that saying they have this secret which alludes to the future. The symbolism of the well being the sanctuary and the sheep being the pilgrims coming 3 times a year for festivals, drawing holy inspiration like sheep being watered. He ties this back into Jacob and says, the matter which is narrated here is for the purpose of letting it be known that Jacob will succeed in this venture and will have children worthy of the fulfillment of this allusion, of this reference. In other words, the sheep in the well symbolize the temple, and for the temple to be built and have pilgrims coming to it 3 times a year, Jacob will have to succeed in what he's doing now, finding a wife, etc. So the passage is alluding to the future to let us know that Jacob will succeed. Rabbeinu Bachya, a commentator from the late 13th and early 14th century in Spain, follows this and points out that every patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has an encounter with a well that alludes to future happenings. He also quotes Breshit Rabbah, which says the Torah is like spring water to the Jewish people. He compares the well to the temple, also saying the flocks are like all the tribes from the north and the south coming together at the temple. Bachya says the words, "they watered the flock," describes how the Holy Spirit was drawn down to bless the Israelites, and the words, "and they would replace the stone to its place," meant that after they figuratively elevated the stone to lofty spiritual regions and absorbed the proper spiritual input from that region, they would descend back down. The specific order, and this is where we really get into some of the wordplay of this phrasing reflects this other phrasing elsewhere in the Torah. The specific order of, and here there were 3 flocks of sheep, alludes to similar phrasing in the book of Ezekiel. And here the glory of God was standing. Bachya quotes Ezekiel and Psalms referring to the people Israel as God's flock, sheep, etc. 3 flocks because the Jewish people consist of 3 flocks: the priests, the Kohanim, the Levites, and then general Israelites, all of whom make a pilgrimage to the temple 3 times a year. Rabbi Bachya again goes back to the Talmudic era, quoting the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Yochanan, who compares these words to the revelation at Sinai. The well is Mount Sinai. The 3 flocks are the priests, Levites, and Israelites. The flocks being watered refers to the giving of the 10 commandments. They were gathered refers to the Jewish people, and the stone was rolled away refers to the Torah being received and accepted. The stone being put back in its original place stands for Moses saying to the people at the end of the revelation in Exodus 20, "You have seen that I have spoken to you from the heaven." So here's some really fun wordplay that Rabbi Bachya notes on a line about halfway through verse 2. We have Yashku ha'adarim v'ha'even gedulah. The flocks were watered and the stone was large. But Yashku Yud, Ha'adarim He, Va'ha'even Vav, and then Gedulah ends with the letter He. Yud He Vav He, God's name. And that, according to Rabbi Bachya, indicates the name being carved in the Holy Temple, because the temple, again, like the well, is the source of inspiration, of spring water. So all of that symbolism, multiple different possible interpretations spanning millennia, just from a couple verses about 3 sheep hanging around a well with a stone on it, and a later mention briefly of Jacob rolling the stone off the well. The way that past and future communicates, a later commentator like Rabbeinu Bachya bringing up the original sage Rabbi Yochanan, and the interpretations of this early Torah passage alluding to the later temple and then even later to synagogues, and the commentary and interpretations, all of that continues on to this day as we're discussing and interpreting and adding on to these insights. So I just think that's pretty cool. Shabbat Shalom.